Okay, good afternoon everybody. Welcome to the legal track. I will be moderating and introducing the speaker of this afternoon. So let's go on with the first speaker, Max Mehl, a program manager at the Free Software Foundation Europe. And he will guide us through the reuse initiative with best practices and tools. So how to make clear licensing simple. Welcome on stage.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm thrilled to be on stage again. Thank you, thank you. Don't applaud too early. Yeah, it's the first time since 2 years that I'm speaking on stage. So I'm very looking much forward to this talk. I've been already introduced. I work for the Free Software Foundation Europe, and I'm presenting today a project that we've been working on for the last 4 years, I'd say. The idea is that reuse is a set of best practices to make licensing easier, free software licensing. Free software is all about licensing, licenses that grant the 4 freedoms. Therefore, it's very important that developers, that users, reusers are aware of the chosen licenses. So we have a few typical issues with licenses. And probably all of you know these issues. I will just quickly go over them since our time is quite limited. We have often missing information about what's the license, who's the copyright holder, perhaps for the whole project, perhaps for single files where you cannot be certain which license, which copyright holder, file is affecting. For reusers using code by other people, it's perhaps quite simple, depending on the structure, to overlook a chosen license. So if you're a developer, you set the conditions for reuse, so you want that reusers are actually following the conditions under which you share your code. And sometimes it's quite hard, or it's quite simple, basically, to overlook this license and these conditions. The problem also is affecting how to deal with multiple licenses. It's quite common that a software these days doesn't only contain code under one license, because you wrote it all yourself perhaps, but you use assets by third parties, JavaScript code in the sense of websites, but you might also have icons by artists. You have license ambiguity, which is another problem, like which version exactly of the GPL, the general public license, are you actually using here, having in front of you? Is it 2, is it 3, which exceptions, and so on. So there are many special rules. And in all cases, especially for communities, contributors need some kind of training. And so you have to invest a lot of time in getting them on board and telling them your best practices. And speaking of best practices, we have a lot of conflicts there. So many different approaches, so many different ideas how to tackle these. Unfortunately, they're often conflicting and most often not really solving the issue. So in the end, we are in a position where it's for users, for reusers, for legal officers and companies, for communities like this. It's really annoying, right? You have licenses, licensing, and it's like, why? Why does it have to be so complicated? So in 2017, we sat down at the FSFE together with a few other contributors in this field and thought, how can we make copyright and licensing easier for everyone? And with everyone, we are not only speaking about legal professionals who know their stuff, but actual developers who want to spend their free time on creating free software and actually do not want to be burdened with like all these legal efforts. The result was reuse. So reuse has a few principles that I would just quickly skim here. The idea is that we want to make it easy to find copyright and licensing information for every single file in a repository. So what we see these days is like you have a single license file or copying file in a repository, and you're not certain, like, does it apply to all files or like also these icons by a third party? So we want to make it easy to have this information available, that you can really say this file is under this and that license from this copyright holder. But we also want to avoid silos, like no external databases or databases in general, no websites that can go offline or which you cannot access if you don't have internet. So the idea is that we store this information directly inside of the repository. The information should be readable not only by humans, but also by machines. Other approaches have been tackling the one or the other side. But we also don't want to reinvent the wheel. So there are some best practices, there are some initiatives. We try to be compatible wherever it's possible. And most importantly, we want to make licensing easy and fun for developers. So again, not only for the legal professionals and getting complicated and so legal, but no, developers should be able to license their code, apply their copyright or communicate their copyright in normal development routines, like so really developer focused. Yeah. So the idea of reuse is that we have 3 simple steps. I will go in the next few slides over these like manually, theoretically, so you can see what's the whole logic. We can also run this all with a tool that I would also like to present here. We are too limited in time. You can ask me afterwards and I give you a demo. So the ideas of these 3 simple steps are that you, first of all, choose and provide the license text. So that you settle down on one license and provide the full license text. Then the more complicated part, that you add copyright and licensing information for every file. Yeah, so that we have a number of options which we will see. And the third step, again, is easy. You got to confirm whether your project then is reuse compliant already. If not, then you go back to step 2, basically. So the first step, choose and provide licenses. That should be quite obvious. Actually, it's a hard choice. Which license do I take? So for new projects, we ask people to really think about this hard. And you save this license text, so the full conditions of reuse, you save in a dedicated licenses folder that we have. And not only just put it here under a random name, but following the Spdx license identifier. What's Spdx? It's a project whose main contribution to the community is to provide unique identifiers for every license, so that you can no longer confuse the different GPL versions, but that you have a unique identifier. And in this case, we chose the GPL 3.0 or later license, and we save it under the same name, under this identifier, which you can find on the Spdx website, in the licenses folder. Then the second step is to add copyright and licensing information to all files. So we have 2 parts of information, the license, and again, here we use the license identifier and use the Spdx license identifier tag for this. And you add the copyright holder. Can be one, can be multiple ones. So in this example, we have a file here as a commentator in this file. We have a GPL 3.0 or later as a license. And you have 2 copyright holders, namely Jane Doe and Foo Bar. And we use different ways how to use these copyright tags. So we also support these more traditional copyright C symbol lines that you can use. So again, try to be backward compatible. What can you do if you cannot edit the file directly? So ideally, the information would be in the file, because then if you copy the file to another place or to your own repo, you would conserve this information. But sometimes it's not possible. You have a binary file like a picture, or you have a JSON file that does not support in-file comments. So in this example, we have a picture called cat.jpg. So you can just create a plain text file with the same name and append it by .license. Inside of this file, you write the very same information that we've seen in the previous step, namely a license identifier and the copyright text, or the copyright line. Now what do you do if you have let's say, a directory and there are 500 icons files in there, like for your application? Now you could, of course, create 500 .license files in addition. Needless to say that this is not really wished for. So we offer a third option to communicate this information, namely the dep5 file. Dep5 is a format, a specification by the Debian project, which we again landed here. We try to reuse those things. And here we have a plain text file in a dedicated location. And we say basically all files in the IMG folder, and now the asterisk. All files are with the copyright of the create artist, and now under a different license because we took them from someone else. Let's say here in this Creative Commons attribution and the version 4.0. Again, here using the Spdx license identifier. So this way, with these 3 options, we can cover all kinds of files in a repository. And you for yourself can decide, ideally, I want to write it in a commentator so that the information is as close to the files as possible, or using the .license file, or using the dep5 file. So we cover a lot of use cases here. The third step is, again, probably the simplest one, confirm reuse compliance. So this is done via a helper tool that we provide. the reuse helper tool, it's free software, obviously. It's written in Python. You can install it as a command line tool. It's usable on all Linuxes, on Windows, and also Mac OS, as we know. And one of the main commands of this tool is to run a lint. So you go to your repository, clone it or have it there, and it runs reuse lint. So the tool goes over all files in your repository and checks whether it finds information about this file in one of these 3 locations. And that's done really rapidly. Like if you run reuse lint on a normal laptop, on the Linux kernel, I don't know, 80,000 files, takes you roughly 1 minute or so. So this tool is quite quick. The reuse helper tool with this lint command can also be included in CI pipelines, for instance. So once you have your project made reuse compliant, you can put it in the CI pipeline, and with one check, you can see whether a pull request, for instance, or the new commit does negatively affect the reuse compliance. And you can use it for many more processes here as a pre-commit hook or so. In this example, we run the reuse lint on this very small project here with only 6 files. And it reports to you, well, we have here 3 licenses, CC BY 4.0. We have the CC 0. In this example, we have 1 file for whatever reason there. And we have the GPL also here. And so for all files, there is copyright and licensing information found. In the end, this means you're reuse compliant with this project. So this is now the starting situation of this hypothetical, very simple project. You have these 6 files here. You have a few binary files that we've seen before, the cat and the dog picture. Now, traditionally, like what you would see today is that people just add the license file there. But as you know, we have here now files from different copyright holders, different licenses. So it would be really hard to reflect this situation with the existing standards. That looks a little bit larger, but that's the effect of the reuse tool, or the reuse initiative, or the reuse best practice being adapted. So we're having here in this example, I mean, there are different variations. You can say, well, we have here now a license file for the cat picture, a license file for the dog picture with this information. We have all the license text files here, fully downloaded, included there cleanly in a separated folder so they don't clutter your repository. And the other files here, the 3 text files, the C file, make file, and markdown file, they carry all this information as a comment header in their specific comment syntax. So the cool thing about the reuse tool, unfortunately we cannot peek at it right now, is that it automatically detects the comment syntax, and so it's quite easy. There are also commands to make files reuse compliant with just a few commands. So we try here to go many steps towards developers, so that is quite natural and easy to use. Reuse has a number of components. Meanwhile, over the years, we have the best practice, which is a rather formal specification, can be picked up, has been picked up by industry and also communities. We have a tutorial and an FAQ, which also covers this example that we've seen here in the slides. The FAQ is not only speaking about reuse, but also about licensing in general, like to really onboard developers who are not familiar with licensing copyright on reuse, on licensing, and demystifying a lot of things. We have the site helper tool that not only lints, but also helps in becoming reuse compliant. And we have the API, basically reuse as a service. You can register your project online there and get a badge which you can include. We have a number of reuse adopters already. So we know of 800 projects registered with the API. Oh, sorry, still. Okay, last slide, or second last slide is we have KDE, the large community which made or adopted reuse for their purposes in their community. On the corporate side, we have Siemens, Huawei, the European chapter, SAP, LiveRay, LGE, and many others. At least these are the ones we know about. Partly the Linux kernel already, they're cleaning up their long history, and the question is whether you are already reuse compliant, whether your projects are reuse compliant. If not, then these are your next steps. I just show the slide. You can participate in the project with code by discussing on the mailing list, contribute code, and integrate reuse in your community. So there are plenty of options, and I would love to discuss perhaps later with you how we can make you reuse compliant in your projects. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Max. I don't know if there is any question at the moment. No, not at the moment, so we'll keep you, we'll let you think a little bit, and then maybe also in the Element channel we can discuss it on later. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we wait 3 minutes because we need to stick to the time, because so that also online participants can join also, and also other participants can join on time the right talk. So it will be just 3 minutes. If you want to come upstairs already. Okay, our next speakers are Carlo Piana and Alberto Pianon, both lawyers in private practice, both long-standing activists and advocates for free software and open source. In their talk, they will present Aliens for Friends, a solution for copyright compliance. Welcome on stage.
Thank you. I am Carlo Piana. So if we can bring the presentation, thank you. So, welcome and thank you for having me and us. I will start right away without much introduction because the time is very limited. So first I will briefly mention why you want to comply. What are the reasons for compliance? Of course, legal, social, you want to respect people, but in an industry setting, you need to create an ecosystem with the least friction as possible. So compliance as security, good quality of software, good commenting of software documentation is important for the environment, for the community, for the ecosystem to adopt the project. So not only for duty, but because you want to your project to be viable for an ecosystem. And speaking of Oniro, which is a large ecosystem, if everybody in the pipeline does the right thing, the right way, right away, we are much better off, and we're good. So the why also dictates the how you want to be compliant. So the first very basic level is to be compliant, but it's just the bare minimum. It's not enough for a good, viable ecosystem. You want to know, of course, what's inside your project, and you want to have it programmatically, not just once in a while. You want it to be a process, something that goes on quickly and in all the process, from the beginning to the end, in a continuous way. But the way today compliance must be made is much more complex, alas, unfortunately. Unfortunately, we have tools and we have standards. And in our effort, we have chosen to adopt open standards for this. Already mentioned Spdx in the previous presentation. Open chain is a magic word for a standard dictating how an organization should be internally and externally organize their compliance. And of course, reuse. We have already just now listened to the presentation of Free Software Foundation Europe. That's very important. And you want it to be, I cannot stress it enough, machine readable, something that computer rather than human beings are able to process and deliver. So and now what we have done for Oniro. The challenges are very high because it's a large system with, for many kernels for based on Yocto, so without a software package manager. Hundreds, if not thousands of packages and files in hundreds of thousands, and a complex build matrix for many different platforms. So how we, in a very nutshell, very rapidly, how we have done it. Of course, we, as I said, we have invested a lot of time trying to always use open source tool. This is the basic choice. Free software. From the beginning to the end, no proprietary thing. There are many proprietary tools, but we are scrapping them. We are using only scan code and phonology, of course, as a tool for scanning and organizing the information that we collect from the source code. But that is not enough for us, and we have, for the challenges we have faced, we have created a new open source tool chain that we call Aliens for Friends, which is the subject of the presentation today. Of course, remember open standards. And also the approach is the real open source way. So we are not reinventing the wheel over and over. We are trying to always reuse things that we can find upstream, so including this is one of the basic decisions we have made to reuse, for instance, Debian copyright and licensing information for finding what license is applicable to the project, which is the first bit of compliance, of course. So it's a very first step. We are at the beginning. We are already achieved some of the milestones, but we need to be held by the community and to be criticized as well by the community, if at all possible. So I invite you to go and see what we have done. Brief mention of who has done this. Apart me, especially Alberto, who's taking the floor right now. Also Untitled Chapter and Peter Mosen, and has been very active in developing this new software solution that we have achieved. So without any further ado, I would like to pass the floor on to my colleague Alberto. Thank you.
So, as Carlo just mentioned, the main problem that we had is having 100,000 source files, thousands of different license statements, because the project is basically big. We have a long list of target machines, so the sources are the source matrix is very complex. Of course, we use automated license scanners. The thing with automated license scanners, like any machine, they do not understand the context, they do not have common sense, so you get a lot of false positives and false negatives. So we use also Fossology, that is also a license scanner, but the main functionality of Fossology is to enable human auditors to review the automated license scanner results. But even with the help of good tools, of open source tools, it's still a lot of work for IP auditors, going through all the licenses, all the files, review them, and check proprietary licenses, other in licensing compatibilities. It's a lot of work, and this means a lot of time. And it's not just a matter of money, it's also a matter of maintainability of the process over time. If you have a lot of work to scan a release, then we will have to do the same work for any release. And you have to be sure to be able to do that work every time you have a new release. This is kind of maybe impossible with a project like this. So we try to find a solution. As Carlo already anticipated, we decided to do it the real open source way. That basically is, if someone else already invented the wheel, do not reinvent that, just reuse others' work. Of course, you need to reuse work of people you trust. And who do we trust? Debian. Mainly because the license and the copyright review in the Debian project is something that is rooted in the project from the very beginning, because they have license compliance embedded in the Debian packages. Going to the title of our presentation, Alias for Friends, is also the name of the main tool that we developed together with Untitled Chapter. The name comes from a metaphor. So we thought, like, it's like I think a big project like this is having a big party. You have to invite a lot of people. Many of them are aliens, you don't know them, so they may bring trouble, ruin your party. So you have to do a lot of checks, checking everyone before they come to your party, and it's a lot of time, it's a lot of work. But if you have a friend, a trusted friend that watches for this kind of aliens, you can just skip the controls and just trust the judgment of your friend and enjoy your party. So in practice, this means that we can try to reuse the Debian community work, especially because their work is machine readable. The DEP5 format that was mentioned also in the previous presentation means that you can parse the Debian copyright file for each Debian package, and every Debian package must have a Debian copyright file. So we can reuse the metadata that are not produced by scanners, are produced by humans, by package maintainers, basically. So, of course, this is not a silver bullet. Cannot solve everything because not always possible to find a full match in Debian. Probably sometimes you don't find any match at all. unfortunately, if there is a specification, there is a policy, some packages do not have a machine-readable copyright file, but this is kind of normal, expected. And but in any case, in this, I guess, this 6 months experience, this helped us to save a lot of work. And this means not only, as I said before, that you can save time and money, but you are sure that the process is maintainable over time. Just a quick look of this tool in practice. We will be presenting together with Peter tomorrow at the Dev Day and the Makerspace at 11:10. Yeah. Just a quick overview, and then if you want to, please join the Makerspace tomorrow. That will be the Dev Day of Onir, and we'll be presenting the more technical details of the project. So we have GitLab pipelines that are running on every commit of the project, the manifest project. So they the pipeline builds everything. The complete build matrix collects all the metadata, aggregates the metadata, and then upload all the metadata and the sources to Fossology. Then there is the audit review process, and then the data are collected back to in a machine-readable way. And okay, you got these two status badges. What do they mean? The first status badges you get. If you open it, you get the JSON data opened in a dashboard, so you can review all the data about the overall status of the project and also of single packages. This is just the delta that has changed from the last commit from the previous commit. So we have only 5 packages that have been added to the project, and of course they have not been reviewed yet, so the Fossology audit project is still red. But you can get also the overall picture of the process. So you have all the packages that are included in a project. You can monitor in real time the Fossology audit progress, what's the provenance of the file, or the total number of licenses scanned by the machine, the audited licenses. And then if you scroll down, you see the detail for each package. You can filter for new packages, packages that are found only on one release and not in the other release. And so you can make comparison and assess what's the status of the compliance process. In the future, we will add to this workflow and also to the dashboard also CVE checks. So you can have everything in one place, both security and compliance. There would be a lot more to say, but if you want to, please join tomorrow to the Dev Day of Onir. We will be available also to explain you also the more details. So thank you, and I don't know if there are any.
No, there's still one.
Okay, sorry. Hand over to you, Carlo.
One final remark is we say free and open source software is not just about receiving, but also to to be giving back to the community. So what are we giving back? Pretty much everything. So of course, Alien for Friends is going to be entirely open source, entirely under a free software license. All the compliance documents, procedures, and artifacts will be made available as much as possible. The dashboard that you have seen is also being provided as an open source. Everything should be under Apache, which is the license we have chosen for the entire project. The entire software bill of material, meaning everything that is contained by the package, of course, because it's open source and it's public, but also the database of decisions, which is something that is very difficult to find. So to be reused for other projects using Fossology or Fossology compliant or compatible tools. So this is going to be huge. And there is another project doing the same thing that we are doing for Alien for Friends, which is clear define. If it's at all possible, we're going to upstream all the information to clear define, and we are pushing for upstream project to use or to better use reuse. Sorry for the joke. And we will be providing for our main open upstream project merge request for this. So that was a very quick and very high-level overview. Thank you for the attention, and as I said, waiting for your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carlo and Alberto. And I know that tomorrow you will have a more technical workshop, so I think that if there are any questions, we can have them also in the Element chat or also tomorrow. So thank you very much at the moment for your contribution. We wait 3 minutes now, and then we will go on with the next speaker. Okay, so our next speaker is Henrik Sanclef. He's a consultant at Software Compliance Academy and Sanclef New Lab with more than 20 years of experience. and he will explain how to check license compatibility with FLICT, so FOSS license compatibility tool. So, Henrik, welcome on stage. The floor is yours.
Wow, does this work? Cool. You basically done half of my presentation, Max and Alberto, Carlo. So I'll continue. Oh, this is an old presentation. Ooh, okay, let's do it. So let's go anyway. So in short, the compliance is about attributing, displaying license text, and disclosing source code. And that, I need to do this. I'm going to bore you a bit. You've seen these kind of licenses where you have multiple licenses in different ways. You can combine them with and or. That has implications, as we're going to see later. So when it comes to my work, doing compliance, it boils down to like these activities. And I'm not saying, like you guys are, you're doing a lot. I'm doing a tiny thing here. And that's checking license compatibility. So what is that? So for a project like this is font config, if I remember correctly. They have a couple of dependencies. So when you're looking at the combined work, we need to make sure that all the licenses are compatible with each other. I'm saying at this point, I tried to, codify licenses, I tried and failed at some point, as you know, Carlo. I tried to write a compatibility graph myself. I'll show you why that was tough. There are some existing for some of the licenses. They are good, very useful, but it doesn't scale. So this is actually done by the tool that we're developing. So this is a compatibility graph for MPL, Apache, some of the trickier ones. So if you start setting, you want to write a dependency graph for all the licenses, you're going to fail, or it's going to be unusable by humans. So next step was to try to use the matrix from OSaddle, and we're still using this one. It's like detached from the rest of the tool, how we check the compatibility between two licenses. More on that later. But so let's like the foundation. So let's have a look at what FLICT is. It checks compatibility between two licenses. That's the major thing. But that's not much of work. That's like 20 lines of Python. It also knows about dependencies, so it can check for dependencies, and it can, I cannot leave the mic. You see here, there's free type or GPL version 2. It means we have a choice, so we can choose. That basically means that we have two ways of choosing the license here. And that has severe implications, which we're going to see later. So let me introduce FLICT. It can simplify license expressions for you. It can verify license compatibility. It does relicensing. So if you have a license like GPL 2.0 or later, when I'm getting a software that you have license on that license, I can say that I prefer to use it under GPL v3. We have a huge list of aliases or translations because as you know, sometimes you read GPL v2, GPL v2+, but the correct Spdx identifier is something we use, so we have to translate between let's call it sloppy way of writing a license to an Spdx style. We can display the compatibility. This is something I'm using when I'm working. I'll show you later. And we can validate the verification with a policy. But a simple use case, a bit annoying to read, but this is like if you want to print it out, or I sometimes use this with text output instead. to see how licenses are compatible, but instead I'm generating a graph like this. So if I have a project, I check the dependencies. I have, but I want to have a look at the dependencies. Sorry, the licenses for this project, and have like a map of the compatibility between them. Then I can issue a command like display compatibility with the output format dot, and from there we generate this one. I find this useful. It's probably in the lawyers' heads, but I need a bit of help with that. Simplify, this is important because we can reduce the complexity when calculating compatibility for a big project if we can simplify license expressions. I'm not taking any credit for this. This is done by Philip and the others at Scan Code and License Expression. We can calculate candidates for outbound license, and it's candidates because we don't promise to be like certain here. So it's suggestions or candidates. So I can basically ask Flick, so can you give me an outbound candidate if the license expression is GPL 2 or later and MIT, and it does. And you see there that it also suggests GPL 3 or later. So there you're seeing a relicensing being performed. You can exclude these relicensing by saying no relicense with the -NR. Here comes the cool part. You can verify compatibility. So I can say for a given license expression like Apache 2 and GPL 3 and MIT, are these licenses compatible with each other? And I get an answer. And you also get a return value, which is 0 in this case, so you can use this in a toolchain. But I actually excluded that from the slide because we found a bug. So don't record this. This is the way it presents a failure. So this is like, sorry, these licenses are not compatible with each other. So verifying project, this is what I set out to do, and I'm saying because it was like a stupid idea I had. In this case, it's kind of easy. You can do this manually. You just look at it and see that if lib font config, okay, if we go GPL, all the software needs to be GPL v2 when it's distributed, or we could go for a free type license. So basically, this is a really simple thing, something we can do manually. But we have tougher projects that I'm going to show you later. But I can, if I codify this into a JSON file, there are tools to do that. Then if we say that we store this file, this definition, this JSON-like definition of this project, then I can issue the command like saying verify this project file. It has a really long name, and this is also something I removed in the versions I tried to update. But you get a long answer with all information, which is something you won't need. So we can strip out with a wonderful command JQ to get like the outbound candidates for this project. Another thing, say we want to apply our policy. It could be that we have a policy, we want to avoid libpng. Nobody wants to avoid libpng. But let's say that we want to do that. We want to totally deny FDL, free type license. Nobody wants to do that. GPL v3. What I mean with avoid here is that Flick will try to match any licenses not in the avoid list or deny list, and try to find like if there's a match with that, it gives you that. Otherwise, it go down to check can we find a compatibility in this project with the avoid licenses, and then it gives you that. So back to the policy and the command. So the first line here is the verify command again, and we store the report in a file. And sometimes the calculation takes quite a while. So if you want to apply different policies, we've separated that. So you can do a verification, store that in a file, and then you apply the policy. It's a long command, sorry. So basically you're saying to Flick, I want to do a policy report, and you get that. And then looking at the policy report, there's, by the way, a markdown output on its way. So you can generate an HTML or PDF report. In this case, we're getting suggestions and we get them listed like with the allowed licenses. So, okay, for this project, you can choose among the allowed licenses, the outbound, and etc. You get the point. Policy result here says that 0, it's totally okay. 1 is like, it's okay, but we have to use one of the avoided licenses. 2 means it's not okay. These licenses are not compatible at all. If looking at a big project like Epiphany, here's the dependency graph for Epiphany. This is not something you want to work with, but Flick can handle this. So better than I can, at least. The funny thing is when checking this dependency and when doing relicensing from GPL2 or later to GPL3 or later, etc., we end up with a couple of combinations that would require a bit of CPU to calculate. So I wondered why like a year ago, why my calculations never ended. And this is the reason. It scales up pretty quickly. You know the power of 2 up to something. So we're flattening the dependency tree. So instead of all these combinations, we end up with 9 combinations, which is a bit faster to calculate. We can verify an SBOM in Spdx with relationships, but not straight out of the box. So we use a tool that I wrote called Spdx Validator. So we take the SBOM and look at all the relationships, and then we generate the format that Flick wants, and then we can do a report on that. So we support SBOMs in Spdx. Okay. Looking at the things we are looking at right now is we are trying to group licenses, because scan code has roughly, I think, 700 something permissive licenses. And if we can use them and create a group instead of like doing compatibility between licenses, it'll mean that we can support 700 permissive licenses, which would be cool. But there are some problems with that, but we're attacking it. So one day we're getting there. We're looking at integration with other tools. And on my way here, I wrote a silly tool that takes an RPM and downloads all the dependencies and checks the compatibility for this RPM, which was kind of funny exercise. Okay, you already dealt with this, so thank you. There are, but I'll do it. Dependencies are usually really tricky to find. What I'm doing, I'm at work, we're using Yocto. So I have a script that analyzes a Yocto bill, checks for each binary, checks the dependency, builds up a tree, blah, 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 blah. And then I do an automatic check on the compatibilities, so I get a warning if something happens. One problem that I have is a project like Cairo has different sub-packages, and in some cases, like Fedora, they have one license for the big project Cairo, whereas Debian has the license for libcairo. They split it more fine-grained. That's about it. I'm seeing I'm running out of time, so I'm doing a bit of attributions on the logos, so I'm ready for questions. Oh.
Yeah, is there any question? If you can go to the microphone in that corner, please.
Perhaps it was good that I didn't get the new presentation because that was even longer.
Very. Yes, very quick one, please.
Okay. The tool is very interesting, in my opinion, especially both for open source projects and companies.
Sorry, I can't hear. I'm old.
Oh, okay, sorry. My question is, this tool can extract the information about licenses just to scan a GitHub repo, for example, or you need to add manually the licenses and the tool can check if there are conflicts?
No, it cannot extract. It needs information about what licenses are in there.
Okay.
So it needs that, it feeds upon that and gives you something else.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Eric, thank you very much for your contribution. Yes. So I just want to remember, Alberto and Carlo, there is a question for you in the element chat, if you would like to answer there. And now we make a small break and we continue with the next speaker in about 3 minutes. Okay, so our next speaker is Christian Noturfta, an Italian lawyer specialized in international commercial contract law, and he will explain us how data protection by design and by default requirements and principles need to be taken in consideration at the earliest stage of the design process. Welcome online, Christian. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. 1 second, please. I'm just... Okay. Welcome to this short presentation on data protection by design and by default for developers. It seems it doesn't work. 1 second. Okay, now. Before starting to briefly see with necessary simplifications what data protection by design and default means, it might be useful to clarify certain terms that are important to understand here first. Firstly, I'd like to remind you that the European General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR, only applies if personal data are processed. So if you develop products that don't imply any processing of personal data, then the GDPR doesn't apply to you, and you don't need to worry about data protection by design and default. Secondly, I'd like to clarify certain basic roles in the GDPR that are relevant for this presentation. That is the data subject, the data controller, and the data processor. The data subject is the identified or identifiable natural person, a living human being, whose personal data is collected or otherwise processed. On the processing side, we have two main roles that are relevant here. That is the data controller and the data processor. The controller is defined as the natural or legal person, public authority, or other body which decides on the purposes and means of the processing. A controller is, for example, a company sending email newsletters to its subscribers. The company decides here on the entire processing, and it therefore needs to have control over it. A mere processor, on the other hand, is again a natural or legal person, public authority, or other body which processes personal data on behalf of the controller. In the newsletter example, it would be the newsletter service provider through which the company sends the newsletters, always just on behalf of the company. Now, only the controller is subject to the GDPR requirements of data protection by design and default. A processor is not subject to those requirements. A process is subject to other requirements within the GDPR, but not to those of data protection by design and by default. Now, if you, as a developer, are not a controller and you therefore do not have a legal obligation as to data protection by design and default, why should you, as a developer, care about it? Well, Recital 78 of the GDPR gives a first hint as to why. It says that producers should be encouraged to take data protection into account when developing and designing products, and to make sure that controllers are able to fulfill their data protection obligations. Moreover, the same recital provides that data protection by design and default should also be taken into consideration in the context of public tenders. These are no straightforward legal obligations, of course, but let's say warm recommendations coming directly from the GDPR. But why are they only recommendations and not straightforward legal obligations? Wouldn't you, as a developer, be a more proper addressee of data protection by design and default requirements, especially from a technical perspective, considering that it's you, the developer, who actually designs the product? Well, this has to do with what I've said at the beginning. The GDPR only applies if personal data are actually processed. So if you, as a developer, only provide a processing tool without actually and directly processing personal data, you are not caught by the GDPR. The GDPR doesn't apply to you in that case. Still, as I argue in this presentation, you should care about data protection by design and by default, and I hope you will agree once I come to the conclusions. Having said that, let's see now very briefly what does data protection by design means. It means, in a nutshell, that from the very beginning and in all stages of design of the processing activities, from development, procurement, outsourcing, maintenance, testing to deletion and beyond, the controller must implement appropriate technical and organizational measures designed to implement data protection principles in an effective manner. And all this in order to comply with the GDPR and to protect the rights of data subjects, which is the ultimate aim of the GDPR. Article 5 of the GDPR, which sets out the data protection by design and default obligations, is of course far more articulated. And there are certain other elements and criteria that need to be taken into consideration, such as the state-of-the-art criteria or the risk-based approach. But for the present purposes, I think that's enough. You see here on this slide that the controller must not only implement technical measures such as malware detection systems, but also organizational measures, which could be, for instance, providing transparent information to data subjects, training personnel, and more generally having in place an appropriate data protection management system. Now, what are the data protection principles a controller needs to implement when designing processing activities? You can find those principles in Article 5 of the GDPR, and I have mentioned them on the slide. We can't obviously go through all of them, but let's make some examples at least. Let's take transparency as an example, a principle to which open source is by definition predestined. The controller must, in fact, be very transparent about the processing so that data subjects are able to understand what is happening and what they can do about it. So if you develop a tool, you could help the controller to fulfill, at least in part, the transparency requirement. For example, you as a developer could build into your product a feature that allows data subjects to monitor the processing of their personal data. Or you could provide clear documentation to the controller in plain language, such as detailed information on the functionalities of your product in order to facilitate the transparency obligations of the controller, which would be your customer. Providing such clear documentation or self-assessments could help controllers to fulfill their accountability obligation as well. In fact, according to the accountability principle, the controller is not only required to comply with the other principles set out on the left side on the slide, but the controller must also be able to demonstrate, to prove compliance. Security is another example. In this connection, recital 78 of the GDPR again, which I've mentioned earlier, states that by design could mean enabling the controller to create and improve security features. You as a developer could, for instance, think about designing your product so as to include certain technical data breach response management features that may help a controller if a data breach occurs. And what is data protection by default? The controller must, here again, implement appropriate technical and organizational measures for ensuring that, by default, only personal data that are necessary for each specific purpose are processed. And this as to the amount of personal data collected, the less the better, the extent of their processing, the period of their storage, and their accessibility. If we take the very basic example of a newsletter software mentioned earlier, for sending a newsletter, you only need to collect an email. You don't necessarily need, for instance, the name or birth date of the newsletter subscriber. So if you develop a newsletter software tool, for instance, the software should, by default, let's say as a factory preset, only require an email address and then let the controller have the option to decide if and how to increase the amount of data required to reach the purposes the controller wants to achieve. Let's now see some general basic recommendation that you as a developer could take as a starting point. The first recommendation I've included here is probably the most obvious. Even as a developer, and especially as a developer, think of data protection from the very beginning. Get into your customer's perspective. Think about it already when starting drawing up a business plan or designing a product. Integrate data protection by design and default in procurement, development, and the entire life cycle. The earlier you, as a developer, start with it, the less time and resources you'll need to spend later. If you realize that some processing activities you have implemented or contractors cannot be brought in line with GDPR requirements. You might want to think about guarantees as well, such as certifications. Certifications, if done the right way, are more than just paperwork, and they can be an effective marketing tool, considering that they can build trust with your customers. As a general rule, I would suggest helping controllers to comply in all various aspects. It's quite an effort, in fact, for the controller to do all the necessary due diligence on your products and services if you don't provide some help with it. This applies, obviously, especially if your products imply the processing of personal data of vulnerable groups or of special categories of personal data, such as health data. Here you could think about helping even more. And lastly, read guidance from data protection authorities and the European Data Protection Board, the EDPB, or get professional support as well. So here on the slide, I had a picture of the first page of the guidelines of the EDPB guidelines, but we can't see them here. I don't know why, but I've included a link below, which you can access, and there you will find the guidelines. They have served as a basis for the recommendations I've mentioned previously, and there are a lot more recommendations. You should, if you're interested to get more information about it, definitely read those guidelines. So what are my brief conclusions for you as developers? Firstly, as I've already mentioned in the introduction, you're not subject to data protection by design and default requirements if you're not a controller. Secondly, however, controllers may increasingly require developers by contract to deal with it. You should be prepared. Thirdly, data protection by design and default may be more and more taken into consideration in the context of public tenders. Again, you might want to be prepared here as well. But even without being actually required to perform by design and by default, by contract or in the context of public tenders, from a customer centricity perspective, helping your customers to comply may well be a strong competitive advantage for you as developers, depending obviously on your product, the users, and the market, of course. In fact, as I think is apparent to everyone, data protection is not always an easy task for controllers who want to do it the right way. And of course, quite some controllers are simply not at all interested in the topic as long as nothing happens. But others, especially those that are a bit better structured and more aware, are interested. And I'm quite sure that also considering the increasing public interest in data protection, controllers will be more and more interested that you as developers help them. So this may be a strong argument for choosing your product. Well, I hope that I've been able to provide one or the other useful information in this short amount of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christian, for your contribution. I invite all the participants to write their question in the Element chat, and we continue in a few minutes. Oh. Our next speaker, Margherita Cera, Rodel and Partner Associate and Lecturer at the University of Padua, will explore different possible answers to the question of ownership and licensing of open data. Welcome on stage, Margherita.
Thank you very much. This afternoon, I would like to speak about the ownership and the licensing of non-personal data and about the open data. I have chosen this topic because during my daily work, I assist companies which are facing to the digital transformation, in particular to the digital transformation of the after-sale services. The after-sale services are changing because of the Internet of Things technologies. This technology make the products smart and allow the manufacturer to be still in contact with the products even after the sale. So the manufacturer could know how the consumers use the product, if the product have some malfunctions, and even the reasons of such malfunctions. All these data, of course, are very important for the manufacturer, which could improve the product, avoiding, for instance, the malfunctioning. Therefore, the companies asked me often to regulate within the agreement with the software house or with the final consumer to regulate the possible use of the data he collects through the smart products. All these data, of course, are today very important also because they could be used within the machine learning process of the artificial intelligence. If the artificial intelligence learn a huge set of data, then it could take some decision, some recommendation, some predictions impacting the environment. Of course, all this data gives to the manufacturer a very important competitive advantage to his competitors. And the manufacturer could have also the interest to use data of third parties. Therefore, it is very important to understand who is the owner of the data. The ownership of the data depends on the category of data. Until now, I have spoken about general data, but the data could be personal data, if they are information which could identify a person, or non-personal data if they do not refer to anyone because they are, for instance, industrial data or a personal data, or if they have been subject to a process of anonymization. During this speech, I would like to focus on such non-personal data, such industrial data. Data could be public or private. It depends if they belong to public subject or private subject. But data could be also covered or not by an intellectual property rights. For instance, if the data is an image or a photo, it is covered by copyright. But an information, a data, could be, for instance, secrets, and to be protected as trade secrets according to the Trade Secrets Directive. In these cases, it is quite easy to identify the owner of the data. If the data is a personal data, the owner will be the person to which the data refers. If the data is covered by an intellectual property rights, well, the data belongs to the right holders. If the data are a public data, well, they belong to the public administration. But regardless of the ownership of the data, the law protects database with a special intellectual property rights. The law is the European Directive on Database of 1996, which provides two kinds of protections. One, by means of copyright, which is not so interesting to the purpose of this speech. Anyway, the copyright protects the structure of the database if this structure reflects the creativity of the author having regard to the criteria he have chosen to collect the data. But the most important rights provided by the directive, the European directive, is the so-called sui generis rights. These special rights is given to the maker of the databases if he can prove to have suffered an important investment in obtaining, in the verification, and in the presentation of the data. I precise that the investment does not refer to the creation of the individual data, but just on the obtaining, on the verification, and in the presentation of the data. Well, these special sui generis rights recognized to the database maker allow him to prevent third party from the extraction or the reutilization of the data in the databases, having regard to the whole database or just a part of the database. Well, this special rights is an intellectual property rights and could be sold or licensed to third party as any other intellectual property rights. Well, there are special kinds of license which makes the databases and the data open data. An example is the license, the open database license of the Open Knowledge Foundation. Well, it is important to understand that the open data are not data without an owner, but are data for which the owner have granted a license, giving to the users some fundamental freedom. In particular, the freedom to share the data, the freedom to create new work starting from a given database, and to adapt the data. Usually, this kind of license are granted under a condition. The condition is that the new database starting from the original one, should be granted under the same license of the original database. This condition is quite similar to the copyleft license of the free software, for instance. Well, it is very important to understand the condition of the license to understand how it is possible to use some data or some databases. The origin of the concept of the dates of the open data dates back to 2009 when President Obama presented a memorandum on transparency and open government, stating the qualities that the data should present to be considered as open data. Of course, the open data are very relevant in the public sector, but due to time reasons, I can speak about this profile in this speech. I would like to dedicate the last part of the speech to comprehend how it is possible to use this data, non-personal data, industrial data, within the machine learning. The European Commission last April published a new regulation on artificial intelligence with the purpose to regulate the use of artificial intelligence in respect of the fundamental human rights. This new regulation prohibits the use of artificial intelligence if there is an high risk, an acceptable risk for humans. For instance, for ethical reasons. For instance, if the artificial intelligence uses some techniques to change the human's behavior with the risk of harm for the physical or the psychological point of view. This new regulation could impact eventually the contents and the condition of even of the open license, actually. So it is possible to use data within machine learning? Yes, if the owner of the data authorize the owner of the artificial intelligence. And yes, it is possible also if the database is granted under an open database license. The existing open database licenses does not prohibit any use of the data for the purpose of teaching artificial intelligence. But since the new regulation prohibits some use of artificial intelligence system, it is possible that the existing open data license will be changed, and in this license will be introduced some limitation or restrictions according to the new regulation. Therefore, also in the future, it will be very important to understand the condition and the restriction of the licenses. Of course, it is an issue under development, but I hope to have given you some reason to reflect about this topic, since the very important, the high importance of the industrial data within the machine learning process. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Margherita. In the end, you were quicker. And so we still have time for questions. Yes, there is a question. You can go to the corner, and so that also the online participants can hear the question.
Hi, so my first question is, are you familiar with the cryptographic autonomy license?
Sorry?
Are you familiar with the cryptographic autonomy license?
It depends, maybe.
Okay, so my question is, so this was a license that was approved by the Open Source Initiative last year. It's a copyleft software license, but it has a data provision in it as well. That my non-lawyer take is that if you create an application and you create personal user data, anyone else has a right to request a copy of their own personal user data from that software. My question is, do you see, this is a very new license, it was approved, but there's not really data provisions that we're used to in software licenses. So my question is, do you think this is something that will become more common, or do you see software licenses that take a data role? Will that become more important? I'm really just curious to know what your thoughts are on data provisions in software licenses.
I think that this kind of license will become more and more common in the software sector and also in the database sector. Of course, the improvement of new technology will change every time, also the law, and usually the law comes every time after the reality. So I think that it is necessary to wait the improvement of the new technology to understand very well how the license and the free license and the open data license will develop.
Okay, thank you very much. And we wait now 5 minutes before the next speaker. Our next speaker, Federico Sartorem, is Senior Associate at Panella Law Firm, and he's specialized in the field of technology law, privacy, and data protection. In his talk, he will explain why privacy and data protection of the future is the oil of this era. Welcome on stage.
Thank you a lot. So good afternoon, everyone. Today we'll speak in the 10 minutes we have to a new approach to privacy and data protection that will be a game changer in the next years. Because as you all know, as you perfectly have experienced in the past, privacy and data protection is also is not only a way to untangle, block, set rules, protect personal data or individuals, but we will discover how personal data and the way the EU legislator shaped the regulation and all the connected tech-related and privacy-related set of laws have been shaped in a way that allows for those who have the vision, the way to understand how to play with the rules and go through the rules they will have the chance to use it in a very proactive and pro-business way, and not just as a way to avoid sanctions, as avoid fines, as a way to avoid the control of the regulator. So we'll see here, and you all know we are starting this presentation today starting from a very, very famous way to say that were used, a shorthand, that were used in the early time, a couple of years ago, let's say 10 years ago. Everyone was saying data is the new oil. So anyone knows in this room, and also those who are connected and are with us today, that everyone knows that data is the current oil of economy. All the business in the 10 most capitalized business in the world base their success on personal data and on data analysis in general. But we will see how the regulator reacted to this way of deregulation, the way that it was data were used to create enormous and unregulated amount of value. So as you can see here, this was brought to your attention, this image, because it's a very classic way of what happens to show how what happens in 60 seconds in internet. So great, so many interactions. Our lives are so fragmented into pieces of data that are interconnected that we are experiencing a constant loss of our identity, and we are experts in the fields, but also normal people using their phones, their TVs, their smart homes, and so on. So this is something that we already are into. We're already living this world, and the reaction was the well-known data protection, privacy regulation, the Gdpr, that provided a set of very tough and complex rules for businesses. But on the other hand, the authorities in EU, in Italy, are struggling a lot in enforcing these rules, and the enforcement is really, really at the dawn of what will happen in the next years. So we are assisting to this way, this moment of change in the perception of the audience, of the way the people are using their devices, the technology, and also the COVID pandemic enhanced this feeling. Individuals, customers today have a greater perception of the importance of their data. They have a greater perception on the value of their data, and they asking for protection. And they're not just asking to the regulators, but also to the business. So those business that will be able to implement privacy and data protection within their products, within their softwares, within the way they're providing goods and services, will be really, really important, and will probably create this added value, so-called added value. And recent research in Cisco showed that, and it's really different from 5 years ago, more than 80% of the interviewed people, they care about their personal data, they care about privacy. And 79%, so almost the same percentage, they are willing to take action physically, with time, spending time or money to protect their data. So it's something that can be used as an element, as a feature of a good or a service of an application, and so on. On the other hand, we have great threats, because data, cybersecurity threats that were connected just to a very, very small part of our lives in the 90s, today they're connected to probably 80–90% of our lives. So there's this technological risk that is mixing with compliance risk, with a legal risk. And you will see here, this stat is very interesting. The fact that Apple, in particular, as a big tech company, they're pushing a lot on privacy features. And as you may see here in this first slide, the 96% of US users opt out of app tracking using a feature. It's just a technical feature. It's nothing that is mandatory. It's not coming from the legislator. And moreover, it's a US stat. And you know that US have a very, very, very basic privacy and sector-specific privacy legislation. They do not care about the protection of, they do not really care about the protection of individuals, and data can be sold in the US and so on. So that's an interesting element that should be read for those who are more into the legal part and the policy part, into a wider strategy of the EU that is the leader in the policy making in the world in this moment. Because as you may see here, the Gdpr, so the regulation that is highlighted in the slide, has to be coordinated with a lot of other pieces of law, regulations, and here we are just listing those who are really famous in the market, in the legal market as well. So like the e-commerce directive, that's a very, very old-fashioned directive. You will see, if you had the chance, and I hope not, to deal with it, it deals with a very, very old-fashioned way to deal with e-commerce. The e-privacy directive is fundamental because it deals with privacy in electronic communication, and it's something that is also very really connected to the 90s perception of privacy and data protection that should be renovated and reviewed by the privacy regulation we hope will come into force in the next few years. And there's a lot of lobbying activities from the big tech and so on. This is the current legal landscape. This is what legislator is working on. So at the moment we are in a very, very interesting moment in time, because we are currently at an intersection between an unregulated world and the super regulated one. And what's interesting is that the 90s way to regulate this field were really connected to a paternalistic and ex ante, so prior control of the regulator, of the authority, while today it's in a self-control, it's a self-regulatory, and this is balanced by huge sanctions. So those who will have there will be those businesses that will be brave enough to take action to raise the level above what is the standard. So they will not just look for compliance. They will try to use the compliance elements that are really flexible, and we'll see how to innovate, to create value, to create something different. They will be paid back with the trust of the customers. And that's something that I can assure you to this audience, because I'm working like every day, and we're working as a law firm with dozens of huge companies, multinational companies in Europe, in the world. It's something that is really, really still undervalued. So there's room to create here. So we'll see here I'll leave aside the privacy by design part. That is a very, very a principle that is more said than implemented. So in my opinion, it's not interesting. It's interesting to speculate, but it's not interesting for business at the moment. But on the other hand, accountability, risk-based approach, those are the principles of the GDPR that are really vague, but if you are able to dwell into them, you can, and those who are behind the curtains of this job, they know that all the interaction with the GDPR regulators are based on that principles. All the media cases you have seen in the last 6 months, 12 months are based and that brought to the attention of the public data protection connected issues, like, for instance, the control over children, children protection in TikTok case. Unfortunately, a young girl committed suicide 6 months, 1 year ago, and a lot of other cases at stake that in Italy. So the involvement of the Data Protection Authority were connected, and how the company dealt with the regulator, the way is 99% of the time is connected to accountability principle. So the ability of software designers, creators, producers, and those who lead their business to interpret this principle in a flexible way will be really, really game changer. So I think we can use the 3 minutes for Q&A is sufficient. I hope so. So if anyone has some questions, I'll be happy to answer. I don't know if otherwise we can add some case-specific, some experiences from what we have done in this field, how we, if you agree, something that may be interested. Yeah, for instance, the GDPR, that is the main body of regulation here, just provides a very baseline of protection that deals with basic obligation connected to transparency and implementation of the so-called legal basis system, saying that you can use data only where you have legitimate ground to do that. But the baseline can be enhanced. So all those businesses that we support in created innovative projects, I'm thinking of wearable systems, I'm thinking on IoT, artificial intelligence applied to traditional fields, and so they have an inner risk connected to the use of data. They pushed a lot, for instance, on transparency, because the very root of privacy protection in the Western world are connected to transparency. The seminal and first article that created the concept of privacy traces back to the 1890, and it was written by two scholars of Harvard Law Firm, and it's called The Right to Privacy. And one of those very scholars, William Brandeis, said that the light should be deemed as the best disinfectant. In this way, the light, the sunlight, and transparency in privacy are crucial. So the first step that should be aimed to those who are willing to implement this approach is to push on transparency. More over the basic obligation of provided by the law, and with new way to communicate, new way to inform in an effective way your target, your customer, and on the other hand, to be, of course, aligned to what you're declaring, what you're showing, to implement those practices within your business, your organization, to create culture of privacy. And the final part, that is something that is more connected to the market itself, not only those who are the single entities, is to push to the regulator with consultants to the certification mechanism, because there are ways that are provided by the regulation to implement certification and use it in a commercial sense. So it's not just something that is on paper, it's something that can be made real. At the moment, there's huge playing deserts that are not used by companies that are more focused on other aspects, on the 10 years ago approach where data is the new oil, while today is not just the basic use of data, but it's also how to communicate it in a privacy-enhanced manner. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Federico. I see that at the moment there are no questions, so we will be back with the next speaker in 5 minutes. The next speaker, Elena Pasquali, is the CEO and co-founder of Ecosteer, an IoT and blockchain software startup located here in Neutech Park. Her topic is data ownership and data privacy. Is it possible to have a new, decentralized and distributed data economy? Welcome on stage.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So, indeed, I am Elena Pasquali, and I'm Ecosteer co-founder and CEO. We are an IoT and blockchain software startup, and our mission is to lay the technical foundations of a new data economy, distributed, decentralized, and based on the ethical principles established by the Gdpr. When you hear the words personal data, what comes to your mind first? Well, if you are thinking about name, address, car plate number, you would have been right about 20 years ago. But as we have heard today, we live in a digital world where each of us is transformed into our own digital twin by connected devices that send continuous data streams to the cloud, data streams that describe in every detail our behavior and our interaction with the environment. This data has a huge potential value. Just imagine how sharing our mobility data could help improve urban traffic, even prevent accidents, and eventually allow the deployment of autonomous driving. Of course, this data is not only useful for our society, but for corporations as well, as is demonstrated by the fact that some of the largest companies in the world have actually made their fortunes by trading personal data. Well, they've done so until now without telling us a couple of things. The first of it is that actually our data has been has been shared with a number of stakeholders we know absolutely nothing about. And we have been thinking that, many companies have been thinking that just by asking a generic consent to marketing, data treatment for marketing purposes would have been enough. Well, it's not enough. Complete transparency over the data transmission chain is necessary, as is the granular consent over each specific destination of use of our data. The second well-kept secret is that, maybe it's not that true that the services these platforms offer us are free, as has been ruled by the Italian courts. The CDS in Italy has actually fined Facebook for misleading clients by saying that their service is free. The court has actually ruled that the service is not free at all, because we in fact pay for it with our data. Well, does that mean that it is impossible to reconcile privacy with the data economy based on data sharing? Well, in order to do that, we need to shift our mindset entirely. We need a true Copernican revolution. We need to change our mindset from thinking that data protection should be focused on protecting data at its point of collection, which is what we thought 20 years ago when data was, the kind of static data we talked about, to actually realizing that we live in a digital world where protection must start at the point of data generation, the connected device, and that the data we should be protecting is not static data, but it's real-time data streams. That will enable us to shift from a centralized data economy, where the platform collecting the data and distributing it has exclusive control over consumer data by third parties, to a decentralized data economy, where consumers have full control over third-party access to their data. And that's the objective of Ecosteer Data Ownership Platform. Ecosteer Data Ownership Platform adds a layer of data access control decentralization on top of any data brokering platform, allowing data owners to choose which stakeholders will have visibility over their data. It works on two key mechanisms: end-to-end encryption and smart contracts. Data is encrypted at its point of generation, and it will reach, still encrypted, its final destination, where it will only be decrypted with the explicit consent of the data owner, of the consumer. Consent that will be given and revoked through a smart contract. So how will things change? This is what happens today. Data generated from my device is sent to a data broker, and the data broker decides who will have access to my data. With a data ownership platform, the data broker still acts as a distributor of data, but it's blind. It cannot see my data, and I will only be able, and the applications looking to access my data will only have visibility over my data streams when I actually grant it. The first consequence of this technology is that it can transform any data broker into a neutral intermediary, as mandated by the Data Governance Act, meaning that corporations and cities will be able to create GDPR-compliant data exchange hubs where consumers can decide which applications, which stakeholders will actually have visibility over their data, can grant visibility and revoke it anytime. Additionally, the smart contracts add the possibility to incentivize data sharing by compensating data owners, consumers, with tokens for sharing their data. Tokens that they will be able to spend on marketplaces, data streams marketplaces, corporate or smart city data streams marketplaces. We've been talking about the value of data. Well, the value of data can be quantified. We'll be running focus groups whereby we have, we've found that data from a single smart meter is worth around 60 euros per year per smart meter. And while data from, driving data from cars is actually currently compensated by companies such as Fiat with up to 150 euros in tokens per year. And there are Swiss insurance companies that compensate their customers with up to 600 Swiss francs for sharing, their vital data generated by wearables, for example. So implementing a decentralized approach means that all stakeholders will actually participate in sharing the value of data in data streams marketplaces. This is aligned with the European data strategy in that it not only mandates the need for granular consent on each and every kind of data usage destination, but it also contemplates the possibility of implementing a compensation mechanism based on decentralized technologies, as we have just described. Our vision and our objective is very simple: to have the data ownership platform installed on every connected device on the planet, thus making multicast end-to-end encryption the universal mean to exercise data ownership, thus really laying the technical foundations of a new data economy, distributed, decentralized, ethical, and inclusive. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elena. Very interesting. Is there any question from the room? Not at the moment, okay. So thank you again, and we will continue in about 10 minutes. Grazie. Okay, so the last speaker of this legal track will be Giuliana Viviano, who joined Deloitte Legal in 2020 as a director of commercial practice, after working also for Phil Fisher and Rodel & Partner. In her talk, she will explain how IoT and new technology can drive sustainable innovation. Welcome on stage, Giuliana.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, and thank you for having invited me. My name is Giuliana Viviano. I'm a commercial lawyer. I work with Deloitte Legal, and today I would like to speak about the IoT and new technology that are really connected with the sustainability-driven innovation and with the sustainability projects for companies. As we can see in the past, the digitalization and the sustainability projects, traditionally we used to say that they are not so connected because the digitalization, we are motivated to see that digitalization was a negative impact on sustainability. But now the digital innovation related to the sustainability, like for smart services, devices for the measuration of pollution, can really increase the sustainability and the sustainability perspective. And this combine the ever-growing population can go ahead and transform the approach of the digitalization into a more sustainability-driven innovation. The sustainability-driven innovation can improve the energy-efficient practices and the environmental governance, and can collect data in order to prevent pollution and other disasters, and it can decrease the level of the carbons and all the pollution. And this is a very real timing for discussing about the environment. And this approach to the sustainability and sustainability innovation comes from the CSR principles, and the CSR is a new approach of company that is not only a business approach, but should also be an approach in order to gain a wider vision of sustainability and CSR perspective. There's a communication from the UE Commission dated almost 10 years ago. And CSR is intended like an approach for risk management, cost saving, access to capital, customer relationship, and human resource management and innovation capacity. And under this perspective, the CSR requires engagement with internal and external stakeholders, because the company is not a one single subject, but it's really linked with the internal and external stakeholders, with the customers, with the people working within the company, with the public sector, and so on. And there's a new proposal for a new corporate sustainability reporting directive, and it's expected to enlarge the obligation or the expectation for reporting of sustainability also for small and medium enterprises that are listed on the regulated market. So all these companies that wants to come to the publics shall evaluate in their investments also source and investment for the sustainability, that it's not only an improvement in the process in the digitalization, but also is an improvement in the external communication to the stakeholder in order to build an wider engagement in the environmental protection. This is because in the agenda of the United Nations, there's a full agenda of goals, 70 goals that should be achieved in the following years. And one of the goals is to build a resilient infrastructure and promote an inclusive and sustainable industrialization and foster innovation, because the inclusion of people all around the world come also through the digitalization, the possibility to have access to digital instruments. So as we can see, digitalization now has a really it's really important also in the investment plans for the future. As you know, the national recovery plan, the resilience recovery plans of the Italia Domani establishes three strategic pillars for the environmental and ecological transition. And these are the digitalization, the innovation, and there will be a lot of incentives for the digital transition of the private sector also, and reduction of timing for legal proceedings, and the improvement of digital security. And also there are the attention for the ecological transition and the social inclusion. And I have summarized this mission of the Italian government for the future in these slides. And the mission one is the digitalization, the innovation, and the competitiveness, and the for the culture and for the hospitality in Italy. And also the mission 2 is to build up a green revolution and the ecological transition. So the digital revolution through the fintech and the e-commerce platform, the robotics and the IoT and the artificial intelligence, the internet and the digital and smart services can improve really the technological and sustainability approach. And also the PNR is expected to support this development also. So in light of this new approach, there are also several directives that have been discussed during the last years, and maybe it will be implemented in a few months or years. And there are a lot of EU directives for digital services and the contract for the digital services. One of the main directives establishes that the exchange of data could be granted as a money value for receiving digital services. So as my colleague has clarified before me, the new approach is that data is a way of pay for digital services, and we expect a really increase in the digital services after the implementation of this directive. This, of course, should be granted in line and in compliance with the GDPR provision, and this is the main focus of the EU legislator, because the directive for consumers and consumer protection need to grant also the compliance with the GDPR. However, there are a lot of processes and services that a company can decide to implement for the digitalization of its process. And of course, the e-commerce and all the digital services platforms, but also the digitalization of the supply chain, digitalization of smart logistics, and digitalization in the environment and health and safety management, and the quality management. These are all processes that a company can implement in the next year in order to be more digital and more sustainable, and to have also some of these funds from the recovery plans. This is a slide summarizing this type of advantages, like the efficiency of process and cost saving, a better health and safety environment within the company, corporate governance and compliance, because all this digitalization and sustainability process should assure also compliance with the law, and access to capital, customers' relationship, and innovation capacity, and a better research and development management of process. However, when you speak about the digitalization and services through the digital platform, as a lawyer, I would like to stress out that there's the need to assess the current version of the terms and conditions and the current version of terms of services in order to evaluate if they are really in compliance with the Italian Consumer Code provision, the EU directives, and also with the GDPR. It's really important for a company to assess a risk assessment and a legal assessment of all the commercial and contractual draft in order to be safe that all the product that you are granting to the consumer through your device or through the e-commerce platforms are in compliance with all the provision that we have examined. So a company needs to amend the terms of services, and the first thing is to define the service and define the right to access to the such platform of the consumer, and will require also company to have really attention with the limitation of liabilities, because it's important for a company to define the limitation of liability clause. And also, it's important to define the information that needs to be provided to the consumer, information about his rights as a consumer under the Italian Consumer Code, and also full information about the GDPR and the eventual necessity of requiring a consent for marketing services and so on. And also transparency, it's important, and when we speak about the transparency, it's important also to define the service level. So you are transparent when you clearly state to your consumer that sometimes you need to update your platform, or maybe you need to interrupt the service because you need to make some amendments, and all these activities should be really defined, and a customer should also have a clear overview of service level that need to be defined and also granted to the consumer. The final clauses are about the governing law, the forum jurisdiction clauses, and the GDPR compliance. All this set of clauses about the compliance is really necessary that a company makes an update of clauses from time to time, because the law is really something that it's under updating constantly. And the security and the data governance policies and the incident management policies, because you know, when you are in digital services, you are open to attacks from hackers, and you need to settle a lot of procedure in order to be secure and safe when you decide to open to the data proceedings of a customer, that such customer is granted with a security policy, so you are really aware of manage also data breach and incident, or hackers that wants to hackerize all the system. So to conclude, our perspective is that the digitalization and the sustainability projects are the two really important projects for companies in the new years, and our recommendation is to have also a legal and compliance approach in order to verify the law and grant all the rights to consumers, like within the Italian Consumer Code and the GDPR, security policy, and so on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Giuliana, for your contribution. This was the last talk of this legal track, and I really thank you for your attention. And I remember you that SFS can continue also tomorrow. So I invite you to check the program online in our website, so sfscon.it. And with that, I remember you that also we have a hackathon going on, and tomorrow we will have the winner proclamation. So thank you very much again, and have fun at SFSCon.